Do British people struggle to show their emotions? I'm Ben Henderson, and this is Here for the History, the new show where we unpack the historical origin stories behind the stereotypes and traditions in everyday life. Today we'll delve into the history of emotions to find out the origins of the British stiff upper lip. We'll hear how the French Revolution turned Brits against emotion, how the Victorians viewed repression as a virtue, and how everything changed after World War II. So, have Brits gone soft in recent years? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, hype and subscribe to follow the show.
This is a bit of a personal question, Ben, but would you say you're an emotional person?
Well, I don't think I have any problem expressing my emotions, but I have actually been told otherwise. I had a girlfriend at university, ex-girlfriend now I should say, who once described me as emotionally stunted. Yeah, she actually used a much ruder phrase than that, but that's the polite version.
Well, Ben's ex, if you're listening, then take it back. But actually, to be fair to her, if she was correct, you wouldn't be alone, because we're not the most emotionally expressive in the UK. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. Well, there's a very long history of us being regarded as a little uptight with our emotions. You know, the famous old stiff upper lip. So you've got the writer E.M. Forster, who famously wrote in the 1920s that it is not that the Englishman can't feel, it is that he's afraid to feel. He's been taught at his public school that feeling is bad form. He must not express great joy or sorrow. And this isn't just something that the Brits think of ourselves. So I've got loads of ideas for this episode from a great BBC documentary series called Ian Hislop's Stiff Upper Lip, in which they point out the great American composer George Gershwin. He actually composed a song in the 1930s called The Stiff Upper Lip. So I think it's something that's definitely, you know, in our global reputation.
Sure, but I feel today like that stereotype, though it might have existed historically, is a bit outdated. I mean, when you think about British reality TV shows or fans at football matches even, I mean, that is full of passion, full of emotion, people going crazy when a goal's scored. This is not people keeping their emotions inside. This is expressing passion outwardly. So that doesn't seem very stiff upper lip. How does that play a part in the story? Yeah,
that's a good point. But I do still think there are some of the, you know, the remnants of the stiff upper lip, particularly in older generations. Don't forget, actually, the singer, Jessie J, that historical titan, did say, she said, I think in the Telegraph a few years ago that the stiff upper lip is a very British thing, and she's a big advocate for it. So it's not, can't be said to be completely dead.
Well, if Jessie J said it, it must be true. And what does it even stand for? I mean, emotional resilience, is that right? Calm under pressure, that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, today we're going to look at the history behind it. Ben is going to be taking us through where it came from, and we can debate whether or not it is actually still a thing. So, Ben, I'm here for the history. Let's go.
Chapter 1, Blame the French. So, we'll start the first chapter of this story, naturally, by blaming the French.
Great, a good place to start, I always think.
Absolutely. So, Alice, it's June 1815, and dusk is falling near the village of Waterloo in modern-day Belgium.
Big day.
And two soldiers are there. They're looking out over a muddy battlefield littered with blood-spattered bodies. One of these men is Arthur Wellesley. I'm sure you've heard of him.
I've heard of him.
The Duke of Wellington. He's joint commander of a coalition of European armies who've joined forces to fight France's legendary leader, Napoleon Bonaparte, and put an end to Napoleon's dastardly plans for French domination of Europe. Now, Wellington's there. He pulls his iconic navy blue cloak around him and he glances down at his boots, from where we get the famous Wellington boots.
Boots, yes, wonderful.
Now, next to Wellington is a man called Henry Paget. So he's the Earl of Uxbridge. He's Wellington's second in command. And they can hear the crack of guns sounding across the landscape. But both men know the battle is already won. Britain's greatest enemy, Napoleon's been vanquished, and British security from here on will be ensured for generations. So it's a great moment. But suddenly, Alice, a shot fires. It sounds a lot closer than the others. Uxbridge turns to Wellington and casually remarks, "By God, sir, I've lost my leg." And then Wellington coolly turns back to his brother-in-arms and replies, "Oh, by God, sir, so you have."
Well, what a story that is. And a classic bit of understatement. I mean, the man's just lost his leg. And it is one of the iconic scenes of the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, sprinkled with a bit of artistic license and wonderful narration there. And actually, amazingly, you can see one of Uxbridge's prosthetic legs at the Household Cavalry Museum in London, which is quite fun to see. But anyway, the exchange here between Wellington and Uxbridge, whether apocryphal or not, has come to be regarded as one of those classic examples of the British stiff upper lip. In fact, do you think Wellington maybe embodies the stiff upper lip as much as any other figure? I mean, he's methodical, he's not letting his emotions show, he loves a bit of dry understatement, stays cool under pressure. These seem like all of the key parts of the stiff upper lip.
Yeah, exactly. I think you've listed there the attributes that best encapsulate the stiff upper lip. So that's why we're going to start with Wellington and begin this chapter by zooming in on his life story.
Okay, fantastic. Where does it all start?
So,
Baby Wellington.
So Wellington's born in Dublin nearly 50 years earlier in 1769.
Mm-hmm.
He's from an aristocratic family. He's a very quiet, lonely little boy. His mother actually sends him off to boarding school at Eton, aged 12 years old. And he has, unsurprisingly, a pretty miserable time there. His only ray of sunshine, in fact, is he loves playing the violin, which I thought was very
so
sweet.
Cute.
But things don't get better, because before he completes his schooling, his mother actually yanks him out of Eton. And in despair, she says, and I quote, "I don't know what I'll do with my awkward son, Arthur." I know, very sad. And then she basically packs him off to a career in the military against his wishes.
An awkward son, Arthur. Do you know what? This is a theme that always comes up in history. So many people who go on to become incredibly famous or successful or brilliant commanders may have been doubted by their parents at an early age. And Nelson's the same.
This is Horatio Nelson.
Horatio Nelson.
British hero at the Battle of Trafalgar.
When he was 12 years old, he was sent to sea, but his family described him as weak. They doubted him.
Really?
They really didn't think that he would go anywhere with his life. So I suppose the lesson is there's hope for us all.
Yeah, hope for me yet. We shall see. I may become a national hero one day.
Yeah, we'll get a column of Ben Henderson on.
Well, anyway, so as much as, young Wellington is totally unrecognisable from that figure I described earlier at Waterloo, the imperious figure, Britain is also a very different place emotionally earlier in the 1700s.
Okay.
So, from around the 1750s, you get this hugely fashionable cultural movement, which historians now call the cult of sensibility. So keep this in your head. And basically, the point of this is it prizes empathy above everything else. Emotion, so showing your emotion visibly, is a sign of sophistication. And this movement generates all sorts of stuff, but most famously of all, it generates a huge amount of incredibly soppy novels. Some of them are actually ridiculous, but one of the best examples is a book called The Man of Feeling. It's by a Scottish author called Henry Mackenzie, and it basically follows the protagonist, a man called Harley. As he travels up and down Britain, he meets lots of kind of fellow travellers, and basically they tell him their life story, and every single time, pretty much, he seems to just burst into tears. I know, so to give you a taste,
Oh no, poor guy.
there's one very famous scene where Harley visits the tomb of a little girl's father. So this little girl's father's died, and we're told that, and I quote, "The girl cried afresh, Harley kissed off her tears as they flowed, and wept between every kiss."
Wow.
So you get the picture.
Seriously dramatic.
Yeah, it's ludicrously soppy stuff.
I think it's very interesting hearing about these historical episodes of soppiness, because it does seem quite modern. I mean, when you think about TV talent shows, say, Britain's Got Talent, The X Factor, which were huge parts of my childhood and teenage years, so much of that was about the emotions and the emotional roller coaster of the contestants. I mean, they do sometimes film people singing or performing, but actually a huge amount of the hour slot was taken up with the way that the contestants were reacting to the news, or telling their parents on the phone that they just got through to the next round and all that kind of thing, and filming the parents reacting.
Yeah, well, I actually find it most annoying when it's on a show where you're clearly not there for the emotion. Say it's like a travel show or I don't know, a game show. You're there to see that bit of it, and then every 5 minutes they go to these like personal shots where someone's like, oh, "My dog's sick," or like, "I don't get on with my brother." And I'm just like, I don't care.
You don't have time for it.
I'm just cynical when it's. I get it when it's if it's telling someone's personal story and that's the point, but not in the middle of a game show. Get back to the game.
Well, Ben, when you go on a game show and you're crying on camera, I will remind you of this moment.
Well, it's now become essential, hasn't it, to win any of those shows? Anyway, I don't want to sound too cynical. We're only just getting started. So the point is, this novel, The Man of Feeling, and many others like it, are immensely successful through the late 1700s. And this is right across Western Europe. It's not just in Britain. But as the years tick by, Alice, things begin to change. Because in France, trouble is brewing. So,
as always.
Exactly. Blame the French.
Yeah.
Now, one of the core ideas, as I said, behind this cult of sensibility is basically the elevation of empathy for the common person, regardless of social rank. But in France, these ideas begin to move from the literary page into concrete political action. And the train of thought I've described there becomes one of the intellectual drivers for an event I'm sure you know all about that will change European history, the French Revolution.
Of course. Okay, so the French Revolution, late 1780s, a huge moment with all kinds of crazy ramifications. In a nutshell, it involved the people overthrowing the old institutions of power. So the monarchy, aristocracy, with all of it came shocking levels of violence. Really, really shocking.
Absolutely, Alice. So people in the upper echelons of society were specifically targeted, as you've beautifully explained. So the Times says, the streets of Paris, strewed with the carcasses of the mangled victims, are become so familiar to the sight that they are passed by and trod on without any particular notice. Every person who had the appearance of a gentleman, whether stranger or not, was run through the body with a pike.
It's really shocking.
Yeah, and that's not the worst of it.
It's so hard to imagine. But yeah, sorry, continue.
No,
Tell me what else.
Well, we have a particularly...
Shock me more.
We have a particularly gruesome description in the same report of what happened to the Princess de Lamballe. So she's an aristocrat. She'd been arrested, taken to prison, and she basically refused to denounce the monarchy. So after doing that, they basically chucked her to the baying mob outside the prison gates. And the Times reports that they decapitate her. Her thighs were cut across, her bowels and heart torn from her. And for 2 days, her mangled body was dragged through the streets.
That is really shocking.
So I've spoken to the historian Thomas Dixon about this. So he wrote an absolutely fabulous book about the history of British emotions called Weeping Britannia. And he basically says that when people in Britain are reading these reports that we've heard, like this one back from the Times, and particularly British elites, they're unsurprisingly absolutely terrified that something similar might be happening to them sometime soon. So they essentially see the revolution as the consequence of emotions running wild, given all the intellectual currents
Too
I've
much
described.
shoppiness.
Exactly, yeah. Too many tears. People being too earnest.
Yeah.
And so in Britain, public displays of emotion are then cast in a new light. They're viewed as subversive, they're dangerous, and worst of all, Alice, they're French.
And we've got this amazing letter that you've pulled up. It's from 1792. It's written by a British woman called Helen Maria Williams. And she says, you will see Frenchmen bathed in tears at a tragedy, but an Englishman thinks it would be unmanly to weep. So in her words there, you can basically see that the attitudes towards emotional expression have been completely flipped from earlier in the century.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can see the way that the emotional climate in Britain, I suppose, has changed massively in response to the revolution. And this really continues over the following years because, our hatred of anything French builds, and with it, the wild emotions we associate with the French, because from the mid-1790s, a hugely important figure that I mentioned earlier arrives on the scene, and that is Napoleon. So Napoleon, we don't have time to go into all his backstory, but he's a formidable military general. He's incredibly ambitious, and Britain is very much in his sights. So he becomes our kind of mortal enemy in the series of conflicts that follow, and they're generally now known as the Napoleonic Wars.
And this is where the Duke of Wellington comes into the story.
Well, absolutely.
And Uxbridge, and his leg, or lack of leg.
Thank you for teeing me up, Alice. So, what's the Wellington up to at this moment? Well, in a kind of wonderfully symbolic gesture for the purposes of our narrative, he's actually burnt his violin and decided to... he chucks it in a fire.
That's so rock star.
I know, exactly. And he decides to dedicate himself to a life of military service.
Okay.
He gradually rises through the ranks of the army, and he makes his name in India with a series of dramatic victories. But the real threat to Britain is Napoleon. So, in 1808, so this is now 2 decades on from the start of the revolution, the British government asks Wellington to lead a force against one of Napoleon's armies, and the two begin to be compared. And you have this like very funny cartoon. So the British press increasingly portray Napoleon as a complete, emotional basket case, in contrast to Wellington, who's obviously depicted as serious, calm, austere, basically the stiff upper lip.
Yeah, and there's some amazing cartoons by the artist James Gilray, and he has one called Maniac Ravings, and you're right, it's just Napoleon being this toddler. It's like a toddler tantrum.
Absolutely.
And he's stamping his feet, he's smashing up objects in the room, emotions flying all over the place.
Exactly.
And so that's the
and
opposite.
That's the point. That's the point. So compare that to depictions of Wellington, and he's always, austere. Think about, there's a famous painting of him by Thomas Lawrence. He's staring dead straight at you, not a flicker of emotion, his lips looking, stiff as a board. It perfectly illustrates this difference in emotional temperament.
Yes. Actually, do you know, my favourite portrait of Wellington, this is a total side note, but there is an amazing portrait of Wellington at this time, and it's from 1812, and it was painted when he was in Madrid by Francesco de Goya.
Oh, the famous Spanish
That's
artist?
it, yeah. And you're right, like he has this persona of almost looking really tired. He's kind of so lacking in showing any emotion. And rather wonderfully, it's the only painting that ever was stolen from the National Gallery collection. And in those years where it had disappeared, everyone was wondering where it had gone, and it actually appears, it kind of has a cameo, I suppose, in the James Bond film Dr. No. So there's a scene where Sean Connery is walking in. He's obviously just looked at the fish tank in the lair of the villain, and he's given a martini, and he sees the painting of Wellington there. So
yeah, it's a fantastic story. We don't have time to go
that
into
is such
it,
a side note.
But it was stolen by a pensioner from Newcastle, wasn't it?
Kempton Bunter.
Who really wanted, he demanded free TV licenses for pensioners.
Yeah, it was like a big campaign, and it was made into a film, The Duke.
Yeah, exactly.
Which has got
it was Jim Broadbent, isn't it? And
Jim
Helen
Broadbent,
Mirren.
yeah, and Helen Mirren, yeah. So there we go.
Anyway, we digress.
The story of Napoleon, the twists and turns of history are all full of surprises.
Too right. Anyway, okay, so the wars against Napoleon at this point are coming to a head. We can feel this earth-shattering clash between him and Wellington is on the horizon. And then, in 1815, Wellington's sitting down to dinner. He's at a fancy ball, I think. And he's then informed that Napoleon has advanced through modern-day Belgium, and he heads off to what would go down in history, Alice, as the Battle of Waterloo. He gives Napoleon a good pounding, and this turns Wellington, this victory, into probably the most celebrated man in Britain. His reputation for calmness in the face of danger, that dry understatement, this all makes him the living embodiment of this new kind of national virtue, the British stiff upper lip. Although I should say it's not actually called that until much later on.
Well, I look forward to hearing about it. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to drop a comment below. Make sure to like, hype and subscribe if you're here for the history.
Chapter 2, Peak Stiff Upper Lip. Now, Alice, in Chapter 2, we're going to trace how the stiff upper lip reaches its peak. So we're moving forward in time to the 1850s, and we start in a boys' boarding school. This is Rugby School in the West Midlands, and many people probably know it because it's where the sport of rugby comes from, of course. But most importantly for us, it's also the setting for an immensely popular novel that was published in 1857 called Tom Brown's School Days, which was sort of like the Harry Potter of its day. In fact, Tom Brown kind of was one of, more or less set the template for those kind of boarding school stories, which Harry Potter is very much part of. So you might ask, how does this novel relate to the stiff upper lip? Well, in this story, Tom Brown is a boy sent off to boarding school where he's subjected to all sorts of incredibly, painful experiences.
It's a lot of bullying, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, at one point he's actually roasted over a fire by the school bully. There's like floggings from teachers, endless learning of Latin, grueling team sports, the lot.
So it's a miserable time.
Exactly. But the prevailing idea that runs throughout is that by overcoming these challenges, he's building that, the most important trait, arguably, of a Victorian gentleman. And that isn't intelligence, it's emotional resilience and character.
Diamonds are made under pressure, I suppose.
Too right, Alice. So I picked out an example from Tom Brown's School Days that I think really brings out this kind of stiff upper lip mentality in the boarding schools. So they're in the common room, and the school bully, called Harry Flashman of
Flashman novels.
Exactly.
Is that it? Is that Oh, wow.
This is the origin of the Flashman novels, which became very famous from the 1960s onwards.
Yeah, and he's an awful character in
it.
He
is. Anyway, so in Tom Brown, Harry Flashman drags Tom by the collar to a roaring fire on the side of the common room, pins him down against it, and basically gives him a good roasting until Tom essentially passes out. Tom's eventually revived by the
Poor
housekeeper.
Tom.
I know. And she sees all the burns on his legs, holes in his trousers, asks him what happened, but he won't say a word. And later on, he's recovering in bed, feeling sorry for himself. He's thinking about writing home to his mum. But then we're told after a good night's sleep, the old boy spirit comes back and he basically decides to just ride it out as any good chap would. Now, does that passage remind you of your time at school, Alice? I see you as a bit of a flashman character.
A flash. I'm speechless. I cannot believe I'm being accused of this sort of thing. I'd like to say I wasn't a bully. Yeah, I was more of a swot. I mean, I feel like I was an enthusiastic learner. I was keen to do well, probably really annoying.
I actually suffered from some of this. I went on a rugby tour once. When I was the youngest, I was 15 years old, I think. And, there are 16 and 17-year-olds there. And at one point, they all burst into my room. And, hair removal cream? They poured it all over my eyebrows and this massive patch on my head. So for about 4 months, I had no eyebrows. I basically looked like Lord Voldemort.
Wow.
It was genuinely harrowing.
Poor
and the worst
Tom
thing is,
Brown.
I got told off for it by the teacher. They basically blamed me as if I'd optionally done this.
But the point is, did you become emotionally resilient because of it, or are you actually
You're
still
right.
scarred?
Yes. So back to Tom Brown. The reason I'm talking about this is because it's more than just a novel. So Tom Brown's School Days is written by a former pupil at Rugby School, and it draws heavily on the author's own life experience as a boarder there. And so we just got to understand, so why is Rugby School in particular such a tough place? We mentioned the Duke of Wellington earlier. After his victory at Waterloo, that made Britain, the world's dominant superpower. It left Britain free to expand its empire. So by the 1850s, when Tom Brown was written, the empire is, growing rapidly. But the question is, who's going to run it? And of course, it's likely to be, in this heavily elitist society, it's likely to be these boys at these elite boarding schools. So first and foremost, the schools kind of act as a boot camp, a sort of training to train these boys up into strong Christian men as they see it, so they're ready for the task of running the empire. But there's also quite a dark link between the British stiff upper lip and colonialism. So I've been speaking to the Professor of History, Julie Marie Strange, about this. And she basically makes the case that with the expansion of empire, there comes this desire among some Victorians to justify all the conquest that's going on. Now, at the time, scientists and anthropologists believed they'd found evidence, in inverted commas, of a kind of racial hierarchy. And one of the ways they ranked different races was by judging people's ability to control their emotions. So you can see how this is starting to tie in.
Yeah.
Now, this wasn't a fringe idea at all. So there were even very well-respected figures like Charles Darwin, who wrote that, uncivilized people, as he viewed them, were more prone to crying, especially when compared to the British, who he viewed as far more emotionally restrained. So you can see here how this narrative is being woven, which places British people at the very top. And through these ideas, the stiff upper lip comes to be seen by many in Britain as a sign of civilization and superiority. Meanwhile, emotional expression is often framed as a weakness. And from there, colonialists can use the stiff upper lip as justification for what they're doing abroad. It creates this narrative where imperial expansion is really framed as a sort of civilizing mission, again, inverted quotation marks.
So this is quite dark stuff. Obviously today, this is accepted as complete nonsense, as pseudoscience, but it's actually very damaging because it helps justify this violence, this rapaciousness of colonialism, and that has consequences that are felt today in many cases.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just to tie this back to where I started this chapter, there's a great historian called J.A. Mangan, and he writes that the British abroad are essentially aiming to create a universal Tom Brown. So it's the idea of spreading that stiff upper lip across the globe.
I mean, Tom Brown sounds like he's had an awful time. I don't think that's something you should be spreading. But it is interesting. So Rugby School, they're training these public school boys to have this stiff upper lip. This is seen as an ideal, I suppose.
Yeah.
And how does that spread and influence wider society?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Tom Brown's School Days, is phenomenally popular. And thanks to its enormous reach, this kind of method of education spreads up and down the countries, particularly among the public schools, who are then feeding, the leaders of state and things like that, but also among grammar schools. And this helps entrench it in the national identity. And the effect of this is absolutely huge. Historians say that it essentially creates the template for Christian masculinity in the Victorian era, which is, stoicism, resilience, emotional reserve, that kind of thing.
Is this something that's just top level of society?
Well, it's
public
basically,
school,
so
posh
it's
people?
definitely pushed by the elites. But it obviously, like all these things, it slowly filters down. And it's transmitted via, the institutions of state. So you've got the civil service, and most obviously is the army. And the army is particularly notable because that's where you get mixing of classes a lot. Working class people show that they're equally as capable of, demonstrating emotional restraint and bravery and all these things that go into the stiff upper lip. During the Crimean War, which takes place in the 1850s. So reports are coming home of incredible acts of working class valour, showing their British steel on the battlefield. And as a result, the Victoria Cross Award for Valour is created, which acknowledges for the first time the bravery of soldiers of any rank.
And the famous bit of the Crimea War is the cavalry charge. Is that right?
The charge of the Light Brigade.
That's it. And the cavalry were ordered to charge directly into enemy fire. I mean, where are the girls in this? Where are the women?
Yeah.
I mean, is that a thing at that point?
Absolutely. So women were definitely expected to maintain a stiff upper lip too, just in a very different way. It wasn't so much for going abroad and imperial conquest. Women were expected to preserve that kind of sense of calm and order at home, basically, suffering in silence no matter what life throws at them. There's a group of paintings by an artist called George Elgar Hicks, I think, that demonstrates this perfectly. So the group of paintings is called A Woman's Mission. And then one of the specific paintings within this group is called Companion of Manhood. I think, the names there really tell you all you need to know. But, given we've got a historian of art right here, Alice, why don't you describe it to listeners and viewers?
Ah, yes. So here we can see, we've got a kind of downcast man. He's got his hands over his eyes. And beside him in this moment of crisis is this woman, this dutiful wife who's comforting him. She's kind of like leaning on his arm. But her facial expression is quite interesting here because she's not weeping and she's not kind of out of control. She's just totally emotionless. It's very noble. It's quite restrained.
Exactly.
And I suppose this is the companion of manhood in play.
And there was other kind of elements of the stiff upper lip directed towards women as well. There's all sorts of instruction manuals.
Oh, yeah. Well, I can see we've got one here. So this one's called Daughters of England by Sarah Ellis. Oh, and there's one, Wives of England. And what she writes is that by mastering your impulses, women not only will be able to appear calm and unemotional, but by trying to appear like that, they will actually feel that way too.
She's pretty no nonsense.
Yeah.
That's extreme. Anyway, I think we painted a picture of the emotional climate in Victorian Britain. So we've got to turn to the 20th century now, because this is when things really, really begin to change. So you have the horrors of the First World War, and they begin to lead people to challenge those old Victorian ideas of service, blind patriotism and so on, that are all bound up in the stiff upper lip. But all this, quivering of the stiff upper lip is basically straightened out when Britain once again is in threat of mortal danger, this time, of course, from Hitler and it's World War II.
So the Second World War, I mean, there's a lot of images that I feel are quite stiff upper lip. People queuing to get their rations, people going down into the air raid shelters, Blitz spirit, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I suppose the posters, keep calm and carry on.
Yeah, well, it's very stiff upper lip, isn't it? Although we should point out that while the keep calm and carry on posters that, have become so iconic on mugs and T-shirts all over the world in
everywhere.
recent years, exactly, they were produced during the Second World War, but they were never actually used during the Second World War. They were reserved for moments of, extreme peril, and they were found many years later, which is how they've become so famous on social media in recent years.
So many mugs.
Yeah, exactly.
So many posters.
But I do think they're very evocative of the age. They show that there was a national characteristic that the government was able to draw on to kind of rally the nation round.
Yes.
And there were other posters. I mean, there's one the Imperial War Museum has, and it says, "Your courage, your cheerfulness, your resolution will bring us victory." So, I mean, that is, stiff upper lip all over, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the link between emotional resilience that actually, it's suggesting that would actually have an impact on the outcome of the war.
Yeah, and alongside those posters, you've got the iconic singer Vera Lynn, who's always associated with the Second World War because she's there on the battlefield, keeping the troops going with that song, We'll Meet Again. The famous lyrics, keep smiling through just like you always do.
Yeah,
it's very
I
moving
love
stuff,
it.
Alice.
So moving.
Your karaoke choice, no doubt.
Yeah, always wear a red lipstick.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that'd bring a tear to my eye if
Yeah.
I wasn't so emotionally stunted.
Okay, so that's the Second World War. Where are we going then? I feel like we've lost that kind of emotional, resilient, stiff upper lip from that point. Is that true? I suppose we'll soon find out.
Yes, you're right to foreshadow, Alice, because after the Second World War, everything is about to change. Chapter 3, the stiff upper lip is laid to rest. So let's fast forward half a century, Alice. It's September 1997, and a funeral carriage is pulled by horses through the streets of London. The foot guards flanking the coffin with their red jackets and furry bearskin hats are walking bolt upright. But something's changed. The silence is punctuated by weeping and cries of "bless you" and "we love you" from the million-strong crowd. Behind the cortege walk the then Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Charles, and the two young princes, Harry and William. So the funeral of Princess Diana is cited by many historians as the moment that best illustrates how Britain opens up emotionally and lays the British stiff upper lip to rest.
It definitely was this unprecedented national outpouring of emotion. There were crowds of people crying. I mean, not just kind of little sobs, but outwardly weeping outside Buckingham Palace.
Absolutely. And I think it can be viewed as, the culmination of a series of huge changes that the country went through after the Second World War. And these changes basically helped shift our national character, or at least our approach to emotion. So from the 1960s, you have the baby boomers, and they lead that famous youth rebellion that basically aims to throw the emotional shackles off that we so associate with the Victorians. Then you also get the rise of modern psychology, particularly coming in from the US, which increasingly portrays emotional restraint as repression.
And I suppose Princess Diana was actually from an aristocratic background herself. So she was from this world of the stiff upper lip, but she broke out of those old conventions by openly displaying emotion and empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not that she was aristocratic. She was a member of the royal family, which is, the symbol of the stiff upper lip. But she couldn't have been any further from it.
And of course, didn't the Queen receive quite a lot of criticism for not showing enough emotion during those months after Diana's death?
Well, there were some pretty damning newspaper headlines. Ones like "Where is our Queen?" and "The Sun." That was a very famous one. And I think people just wanted maybe something a bit different from their monarch by then. They wanted emotion, but not done privately. They wanted to see that emotion and maybe share in it. And I think that shows how much the nation changed in those 50 years after the war. And I think it's interesting how Prince Harry and Prince William have become such big advocates for mental health, which obviously I can't imagine in the Victorian age. From a personal perspective, I think one of the first times I ever heard about, a well-known male role model coming out and talking about mental health was when Harry first did it. And I wonder how much that experience of walking behind their mother's coffin during that funeral really played into that. And I think in Harry's autobiography, Harry writes about the fact that the only time he cried in that entire funeral procession was when they lowered the coffin into the grave. And he says that he felt that he let the family down, by breaking the family ethos, which is pretty remarkable.
Oh, it's so sad. I wonder if it's even gone further now, because people would almost be looked down on for hiding their emotions. I mean, you call it emotional repression. Your ex-girlfriend would call it emotionally stunted.
Yeah, people might start calling you that. Outrageous. So, no, but I think you make a serious point here, though, that the national mood has flipped so much with regard to emotions that it's almost unfashionable to stay buttoned up. It's expected that you demonstrate them. I mean, me and you post on social media, and so often I get fed videos where they're saying how to be successful. It's not about what you're actually talking about. It's about demonstrating your inner life, showing your emotion, showing what you really care about. It's everywhere, this desire for authenticity.
And of course, we've also had a great rise in therapy, people going to therapy, talking about therapy, which previously would have been seen as something that should be completely private.
Yeah.
And lots of older generations might look at people our age as being too soft.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
It's a generational shift. And I guess the question is, do things keep going in the same direction? Will we keep opening up more and more and more? Or will things swing back?
Will there be another book like Tom Brown's School Days?
Yes, exactly.
But I think that is a good place for us to end. Thank you so much, Ben.
No, thank you.
I think the big takeaway for me, and something that I'd never really thought about, is just the link between our emotions or perception of a national emotion and how much this might have affected international politics or international events. So that's fascinating. And I will look at my Keep Calm and Carry On mug with greater interest in the days to come. I hope all of you at home watching on YouTube feel the same way. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please do leave a comment below or on our social media videos. Let us know what you think. Don't forget to like, hype and subscribe. Make sure to tell all of your friends. And thank you for joining us on Here for the History. Goodbye.
Goodbye.